Good journey times. Well, Sam Rowlands is a Conservative MS for North Wales and the Policy Director of the Welsh Conservatives. He joins me now. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning.
Is this the principle that you're worried about, or the implementation of it?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, really. I think what strikes me with the proposal coming in on the 17th of September, it does feel a bit like a sledgehammer to try and crack a nut. As you outlined in the opening of this, the cost of this, Welsh Government's own estimate is over £30 million, around £33 million just to implement this change. The other big factor, which perhaps isn't being properly considered within all of this, is the cost to our economy. Now, Wales is at the bottom of nearly every list across the UK when it comes to economic output and prosperity. And this is going to cost the economy £4.5 billion. That's the central estimate from the Welsh Government themselves, up to around £6 billion cost to our economy by slowing Wales down and slowing everyone down.
But I guess people would say to that, how do you put a price or a value on a child's life? And the figures are quite striking, aren't they? The difference between being hit by a car travelling at 20 miles per hour compared to one travelling at 30 miles per hour is very, very substantial.
Absolutely, and we've made huge strides in this area as a nation over the last 20 years. So across Great Britain, since 2000, we've nearly halved the number of serious injuries and those who've been killed in 30 miles per hour zones. We've made huge strides in this area, and we should continue to do that by targeting where those 20 mile per hour zones should be. So absolutely right, they should be outside schools, they should be outside hospitals. Those 20 miles per hour zones should be in areas where it's heavily built up with lots of people walking or cycling. But to have a blanket approach across every residential street in Wales is not going to do what it needs to be done.
Except, I guess, that if you have the sort of zones outside schools, hospitals, etc., that you're suggesting, drivers, I guess most drivers will have had the experience of getting a speeding ticket because they're not quite sure what the speed limit is, because it changes from one part of the road to the next, And if you have this sort of patchwork of 20 mile per hour zones that you're suggesting, isn't there a danger actually that motorists get more confused by it than they would do by a blanket approach?
It's been pretty clear to me, Vaughan, when I've driven around past schools, what the speed limit is. I haven't received one of those tickets that you talk about. And actually, it probably makes people more alert and more aware when they see that change of speed down to 20 miles per hour outside of those schools. What we need to be thinking of here also is those people who day to day are doing their jobs around our towns, around our villages, and the impact on them. Think first of all of our domiciliary care workers whose job it is to go from one vulnerable person's house to the next, to care for them, to support them. Most of those people are not being paid by the hour in that travel time. They're getting paid by the mile. Those people are either going to have to visit fewer people or be paid less for the work that they're going to undertake. And we're desperately needing more people in those types of jobs. The knock-on effect of 20 miles per hour is much more significant than I think Welsh Government have begun to think about.
I was talking earlier this week on my Welsh language programme to Stuart Cole, who's advised the Welsh Government a lot on public transport and so forth. And one point he was making is that there's a knock-on here the Welsh Government doesn't seem to have realised in terms of public transport, particularly buses, that if you slow down the speed at which a bus travels, you need more buses to provide the same service, and that costs money. Is that a concern for you as well?
Absolutely. Professor Cole has put some significant research into this, as you've outlined. And the knock-on effect on our bus services is going to be significant, because most of our buses are probably travelling around our villages and towns where this new 20 miles per hour will be in place. And let's not forget that those buses are invariably funded significantly by Welsh Government funding. So that's more money that's going to have to be taken from the coffers of other important services, other important departments that people need support from to fund our bus services because of this implementation of 20 miles per hour. Another important area area actually is our retained firefighters. Retained firefighters, they have to come from a certain radius to get to a fire station in a certain amount of time. Otherwise, they cannot be a retained firefighter. That radius from that fire station is going to have to be reduced because they're travelling at a slower speed to get to their fire station. The knock-on effect is huge.
I just wonder though, Sam. I hear your arguments, and I think there's a lot of validity to them, but they remind me a little bit of the arguments that were made when smoking was banned in public places, when carrier bag charges were introduced. There were a lot of good, valid arguments that people advanced, but when the change was made, people just accepted it. It settled down, and now we think it's the new normal. I wonder, however valid those complaints are, I wonder if once it's introduced after a few months, people will just learn to live with it.
I think there are quite different arguments, aren't they? So the smoking is a choice that people make as a lifestyle or a habit. Plastic bags certainly had a very strong environmental case. Driving at a speed of 30 miles per hour, which we've done for decades, and people have got used to, and as already outlined, the number of serious injuries and deaths in those 30 mile per hour zones have halved in the last 20 years. That's a very, very different argument to people generally driving around, getting on with their lives, getting their children to school, getting to work, the day-to-day things that we just have to do. I think they're very different arguments. Now, Welsh Government are, pig-headed in getting this thing in place by 17th of September. It's going to happen. What we also have to remember within this is councils themselves who are going to have to bear the brunt of the cost of implementing a lot of this. And we know that councils, just the guest on before me was talking about people striking in councils because of the lack of funding. It's the fact that councils are going to have to deal with this as well.